Today you'll be doing some doodle notes for solving multi-step equations. Go ahead and get yourself set up with a few colors of your choice. When solving multi-step equations, we really want to look at 4 separate steps. We want to convert, use the distributive property, combine like terms, and then finally isolate the variable. Let's go ahead and zoom in and put a few notes in the converting box. We may want to consider rewriting some things, so I'm going to show you what to rewrite. Anytime we have a fraction or if we have a mixed number, we want to rewrite a mixed number into an improper fraction. Also, when we're looking at fractions, we may want to consider finding a common denominator or change our fractions into decimals, whatever you're more comfortable with. Okay, so let's go through to our next step, which is using the distributive property. When using the distributive property, the goal is to eliminate the parentheses. You remember the distributive property uses multiplication. So a quick example here. We multiply both things in the parentheses by the number outside to get rid of the parentheses. Okay, and feel free to add any color as we go. Let's take a look. Oh, an important reminder. Be careful with the negatives. You're going to encounter a lot of positive and negative numbers. Always be careful when you're working with the negatives. Be especially careful when you're distributing a negative and combining like terms. That's an important reminder. Okay, finally, combine like terms. We've been working on this in class. When we're combining like terms, make sure you take the sign in front of it. Okay, after we've done all of those steps, our next step is to isolate the variable. So let's put a couple of notes into this sign for isolate. That means get all of the variables moved to one side of the equation. Then we want to get the variable alone or isolated. Okay, moving on. The ultimate goal here. See how it says goal with trophies down here? So if you want to color these trophies in here. The goal. What is the goal? To isolate the variable and to come up with an answer. So our final goal is to get the variable on one side, so one side of the equal sign is the variable, and then get the constant on the other side. You'll see more what this looks like as we move forward. So how do we reach this goal? How do we reach this goal? 2 ways. We use inverse operations. So we'll put this over here, inverse operations to undo. So we do the inverse operations on both sides of the equation, and then that's what these arrows here mean, inverse operations. And then this check mark in cloud means we're following the order of operations, but we're following it backwards. And we're following the order of operations backwards because we're undoing operations to get the variable by itself. So another great thing about these multi-step equations, you can always check that your answer is correct. You can substitute your answer in and check that your solution is correct, and you can fix any mistakes that you make. So that's what's great about multi-step equations. Substitute your solution. You substitute it back into your equation to make sure the equation is true. And in this star here, here's a very important piece of information here in the star. Your answer should be in this format: x equals whatever your number is. So x equals 3 or x equals 4. So let's make sure that we are remembering the format for your answer. Okay, so that's important. X is part of your answer. Okay, so x and whatever the value is. Not just a number. We don't want just a number for your answer. Okay, let's go to the second side of the document. Okay, on the second side, we're going to do some actual solving of these multi-step equations. And they're going to have fractions and decimals. And what I like about this note sheet here is there's a reminder that we want to show our steps, we want to show our work, and we're going to show just one step per line of work, so one step at a time. So, and we have this little reference over here that is a checklist of reminders. Okay, so we'll write reminders right up here. So our first reminder is to convert. So that means we're going to take a look and see if we have fractions or decimals and can we convert them to simplify our problem. So take a look at our first problem. I see that we do have fractions and decimals together. So let's convert. I think I'm going to go with decimals and convert this to a decimal. So 1 2/5, if I change it to an improper fraction, we multiply 5 times 1 plus 2, and this becomes 7/5. And then it's 7 divided by 5, which equals 1.4. So our converting is done. Let's rewrite this problem with 1.4 as the decimal. So I'm going to do that in my first step. Okay, so I do take the time to rewrite everything. So then if I look at my checklist, I've converted, so we can check that off. Next is to distribute. So let's use the distributive property to get rid of parentheses. So now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to distribute 3 times m and 3 times 1.4. So 3 times m is 3m. And 3 times 1.4 is 4.2. Okay, then I bring everything else down, and I do this step by step. Okay, so distributing is done, so I can check that off. The next step says combine. So now on both sides, I'm looking to combine any like terms. Okay, so where do I have like terms? Here and here. So 3m minus 2m is 1m. Again, bringing everything down, being patient, being neat, showing each step. Okay, now we're going to isolate. So I keep referring back to my checklist. I did combine. Now I isolate. And isolate means get our variables together and get our constants together. Okay, so I want to move my variables first, and I use inverse operations. See how there's an m over here and an m over here? I need to get those together. So to get those together, I'm going to subtract 1m, subtract 1m, And that leaves me with 7m, and then bring everything down. Okay, now I want to get my constants to the right. So I use inverse operations, and I add 18.5 to both sides. And that'll get 7m on one side and 22.7 on the other side. Okay, now we're down to a one-step equation. So now, hopefully you're recognizing that this is 7 times m. So to get m by itself, to isolate the variable, I'm going to divide both sides by 7. And I get kind of a crazy answer here. 3.428 . So I will probably just want to round this, and I can round it to the hundredths place like money. So that means I look behind it and it's just going to be 3.24. It's not going to round up or anything, just stays like that. So we could check this work by substituting back into our answer into our original problem. Okay, so I'm going to use this checkbox here and rewrite the problem. Okay, so in place of m, I put 3.24. We do have to keep in mind when we're checking here that we did round our answer, so that might account for a slight difference on both sides. So then you follow the order of operations and find out what is on each side of the equation. So on the left side, I get 7.24. So I multiply this and subtract 18.5 by it. And the right side's a little more complicated, but we'll go step by step. I want to solve inside the parentheses first and do this first. Okay, so I get 4.64 in the parentheses. And on 2 times 3.24, let me check that. Okay, so then I do 3 times 4.64, and I get 13.92. Now I subtract 6.48 from that, and I get 7.44. And you can see that this is very close. They do about equal each other, especially because I rounded. So I would say we have the correct answer. Okay, one more problem to try here. And again, remember that this idea of the ladder, one step at a time. One step at a time. That's the point of the visual. We do one step at a time. Okay, so our first step is to convert. And if we want to change these to decimals, we could, or we could leave them as fractions. Let's see how this goes. So we could consider changing to a decimal, or we could make this have a common denominator, which would be 6 out of 8. So let's rewrite, and I think our first step here, though, is to distribute the negative. And I'm going to put a -1 in there so it makes more sense. So we're going to distribute -1 times these things. Okay, so 7b, let's see, until I'm sure, I'm just going to distribute first. And this becomes -1/8. And, okay. Now, combine like terms. So here, I would have to have a common denominator to do a -3/4 minus 1/8. And I also have to combine like terms here, 6b and 1b, or 7b minus 1b. So that's 6b. And then if I make these have a common denominator, let's see what happens here. Okay, so now it's easier with a common denominator. 6b, this is -7/8 equals b plus 2. All right, now we want to get our variables on one side. So see how we have a b over here and a b, and 6b's over here. I want to get those together. So we use inverse operations. 6b minus a b, that's 5b. And now we have a 2-step. We may want to see, here, let's move this down. Okay, now use inverse operations. So we're going to add 7/8 to both sides. So 5b equals, now 2 plus 7/8, we may want to change 7/8 into a decimal, 7 divided by 8. So then that becomes 2.875. And then our final step, recognize that that means multiplication, so the inverse of multiplication is division. And let's do our final step of dividing. And we get, so we want to leave it, it does end there, it terminates there, so I'm going to include that as my whole answer. Okay, and then we're going to try to check this. Okay, so again, when we check, we substitute our answer in for the variable. Okay, so there's my answer rewritten with, instead of the variable, I put our answer in there, and now we solve to see if the one side of the equation equals the other. I'm going to do this side first since it's a little bit easier. And then on the left side, I'm just going to handle one step at a time. I guess you could carefully type this into your calculator using parentheses. Let me try that. Okay, so I did that step first. Now I'm going to do this. And I changed 3/4 to a decimal. And now finish this off and let's see if we get the same thing. And I just typed all that in and I did get the same thing. So this did check out. Using the substitution, I did check to see that it worked. Okay, had to add a few more details of color, and just the point is to show step by step, and I know that these problems are going to get more difficult. Just take your time, one step at a time.